Hello and welcome to the Terminology Leading Practices stream of SNOMED CT Expo 2020. My name is Monica Harry and I am the Director of Content and Mapping at SNOMED International, and I'll be moderating today's session. Just a note, please use the Q&A box to type your questions to the presenter, and all questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation. I'm now pleased to introduce my colleague Toni Morrison, a senior terminologist here at SNOMED International, and she will be presenting the relationship between SNOMED CT and the ISO standards for the identification of medicinal products, otherwise known as IDMP. Thanks, and over to you, Toni.
Thank you, Monica. When SNOMED embarked on the project to develop a drug model a few years ago, we had three high-level goals. One, we wanted a drug model that could be extended or refined in either the international release or international extension as new requirements emerged from our users. We wanted a model that was compatible with IDMP standards in the international edition where it met our stakeholder requirements, realizing that the IDMP standards are primarily directed at the regulatory space, but that there was a lot of information in them that overlapped with content we expected to model in SNOMED. We also wanted a model that provided a draft model for a member's national extension that was compatible with the SNOMED international release to support members who might be embarking on a project to develop their own extension model. As we worked through this, we ended up with a model that supported 5 different layers of abstraction of medicinal products in the international release. We have medicinal product containing and containing only, medicinal product form containing and containing only, and clinical drug containing precisely. And we'll look more in depth at each of those in the upcoming slides. So medicinal product containing is an abstract representation of a medicinal product based on a description of the active ingredient that it contains. It means that the product must contain the active ingredient specified in the fully specified name, but it might also contain additional active ingredients. This could act as a parent for a PHP level 1 concept in the IDMP world. The medicinal product containing only is similar, except that it means that the product contains only the active ingredient that is specified in the FSN. And it is compatible with the ISO level 1 PHP ID. So it's PHP ID sub L1 in the IDMP standard. So here's a diagram that shows the two concepts. This is a diagram for the product containing only paracetamol, and you can see we have associated it with an active ingredient and indicated that there is one and only one active ingredient, and it has an inferred parent, a product containing paracetamol, so it lines up very nicely. The model for product containing paracetamol will look very similar, but it will not have a count of active ingredients since it may contain additional active ingredients. The medicinal product containing only, when you have more than one ingredient, has multiple instances of has active ingredient, and the count is set appropriately based on the number of active ingredients. Again, the medicinal product containing only will be a child of the product containing level concept. The medicinal product form containing and containing only are similar, except they have an additional attribute that describes the intended site of use. Medicinal product form containing will indicate, in this example, that it's an oral dose form. And again, the only version will contain that it's an oral dose form and indicate the number of active ingredients. The clinical drug containing precisely concept is the most granular concept that we have in the international release. It's an abstract representation of a medicinal product based on a description of the precise active ingredient, the basis of strength substance, or BOS, the strength, the manufactured dose form, the unit of presentation, and implies the drug product must contain only the precise active ingredient specified in the fully specified name. So here's an example. I know this is a little bit difficult to read, but we'll kind of walk through it. So we are describing a product containing precisely amlodipine as amlodipine mesylate, 5 milligrams per 1 each in a conventional release oral tablet. And you can see discrete attributes for the manufactured dose form, the unit of presentation, the count of active ingredients, the precise active ingredient of amlodipine mesylate, but the basis of strength substance of amlodipine, and then the numerator, denominator, and their associated units to express the product strength. Next. The pharmaceutical dose form was a requirement in order for us to be able to create our clinical drug concepts. There is an IDMP standard 11239 for pharmaceutical dose forms, and we leveraged that as we designed our dose form model. Again, there were likely some components of that that did not apply to the content we were creating in SNOMED, but we tried to be compatible when possible. And an example of a pharmaceutical dose form, again, I apologize, but there are several attributes for this one. So a conventional release oral tablet is an oral dose form. Its basic dose form unit is a tablet. Its intended site will be oral. Its release characteristic is conventional release, as opposed to prolonged or extended release. Its dose form transformation, there is no transformation for this particular one, and its administration method would be to swallow. The relationship between SNOMED, CT, and IDMP is shown on this diagram, and we'll break this down into individual components because it's a little bit busy here. This is a diagram that has actually been used by the ISO group that is responsible for IDMP to start to understand the relationship between these two pieces of work. So the first point we'll look at is the relationship between a medicinal product containing only and the PHP level 1 concept from ISO 11616. So examples of medicinal product containing only are a product that contains only atorvastatin. So again, these are based simply on the active ingredient of the medicinal product. We can have products containing more than one ingredient. There is technically no limit to the number of ingredients. I believe in general, we probably have not done concepts that have more than 5 to 6 ingredients. But that's not because of a technical limitation. It's because clinically that's just within the boundaries of what we have been working with up to this point. The next one is a relationship between the medicinal product form containing only, and that's equivalent to a PHP level 3 concept. So these are examples would be product containing only paracetamol in an oral dose form, or product containing only codeine and paracetamol in oral dose form. Again, no limit to the number of active ingredients we could specify in these. The clinical drug containing precisely is equivalent to the PHP level 4 concept. So then we're getting into more granular details. A couple of examples here are product containing precisely paracetamol, 500 milligrams each in a conventional release oral tablet. You will note that that one does not specify the precise active ingredient in parentheses like the second example does. The reason is because for this paracetamol example, the precise active ingredient and the basis of strength substance are identical. So our editorial guidelines call for us not to restate when they're identical, We only restate these as a different precise active ingredient when it differs from the basis of strength substance. This is also an example where you see a slightly different dose form, where it's a prolonged release oral tablet. The real clinical drug concepts will exist only in the national extension, not in the international release. And these are medicinal products that would be brand name products that may vary from country to country. And we also understand that certain brand names may be used in multiple countries and not have the same active ingredients. So we have excluded those from the international release, but we have provided some guidance for national extensions as to how those could be modeled. These are equivalent to an MP ID from ISO 11615. An example would be the Inlyta 3 milligram tablet manufactured by Pfizer. Again, we have examples where these will classify in accordance with the content maintained in the international release. And the next one is a real packaged clinical drug. Again, that would be something that would be found in a national extension because it will be specific to a country or jurisdiction. That's equivalent to a packaged product or PCID from ISO 11615. And to further detail out the Inlyta example, this would be something like a package containing 28 tablets of Inlyta 3 milligram tablet manufactured by Pfizer. And the next relationship will be clinical drug containing precisely is basically a manufactured item that's not an identified class from ISO, but might be useful to some of the SNOMED users. For more detail about the project and the model, there's a link here, and it's the SNOMED Drugs project in our Confluence space. There's also information here where you can request more information post-presentation by submitting to info@snomed.org.
That was a very good presentation. Thanks, Toni. Really complex material. Thanks so much. Can I ask that attendees give us a minute, because we're going to switch over from our pre-recorded content so that Toni can address your questions that you've been submitting live. Also note that this presentation will be available on the event platform for the next 3 months. Thanks all for attending, and I hope you found it as worthwhile as I have. Thanks, Toni.
Thank you.
Thank you, Toni. That was an excellent presentation. Very detailed, lots of information there for people to absorb, digest. So I'm looking at the question list here. I just want to remind people that related to this, there was another session that Jane Miller presented with Robert Stegway on the UNICOM project, which is implementing IDMP to improve patient safety and facilitate better healthcare for all. It's a European project. You might find it useful and of interest to go and listen to that recording. So in the meantime, we had one question, which was to say, what is the future of IDMP with regard to SNOMED? I guess that's a question for Toni. Next steps with regard to IDMP. Toni, you might be on mute, I suspect. We can't hear you.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Ah, yes, now we've got you.
I think Allison and I were muting and unmuting back and forth. So next steps for IDMP is that we will continue to monitor the evolution of the IDMP standards. There are some that are undergoing a review and revision as people have tried to implement them. So we will see if that has any impact on the work that we've done. We'll also continue to monitor member requirements, particularly with regards to members who may be affected by the UNICOM project that was mentioned earlier. And I would encourage any members who are looking at implementing IDMP or have any particular requirements in this area to please let us know as soon as possible, or schedule a time to discuss what you're doing and how that aligns, so that we are prepared for any changes that might be required of us as we move forward.
Thanks, Toni. So I have another question. Is SNOMED planning on using ISO dose forms to move forward with the modeling?
So when we did our pharmaceutical dose form model, we did heavily consult the related IDMP standard, and we applied it where it made sense for us to in our modeling and to fulfill our requirements. So you will see a significant alignment with the IDMP standard in our pharmaceutical dose form model.
Thank you. Next question is, how can IDMP standards cover the legal aspects of various countries and the pharmacovigilance therein? So each country.
So the IDMP standards are really targeted towards the regulatory environment. That's why we won't be fully compliant with IDMP, because we are focused on the clinical use cases. So I think the legal aspects obviously would be subject to whatever the local legal aspects are, but the standards are quite comprehensive and are certainly being, heavily looked at by a number of regulatory agencies. So I assume that they are covering those requirements, or if there's a missing requirement, that those organizations are, asking for, any particular issues to be addressed in the standards.
Right. Thank you. Another question. So I'm just reading it as you're in IDMP SNOMED to mapping, I think slide number 6, if the manufactured item uses a national dose form, how could you map it to the international release then?
So with regards to the dose forms, the modeling that we've done is very granular. So we've identified all of the bits and pieces of a dose form. What's the intended site that would relate to the IDMP standard? What would be the basic dose form? Is it a tablet or a capsule? So there would be multiple ways you could go about mapping. I'm aware of at least one member country that has done some mapping, and they actually identified some dose forms that they required that we had not accounted for. So requests for those were submitted and resolved. So there is definitely a potential to create that mapping, but it would have to be on a country by country basis if you're using a national dose form terminology.
All right.
So,
and one question, which I think is the last question up to this point. Okay. I noticed there is no equivalent PHP level 2 in the SNOMED medication model. Is there a rationale for that?
And I see that came in from Robert. The rationale on that, Robert, would very likely be that when we were doing our medication model, we weren't introducing new types of concepts necessarily without having them supported by member requirements. So at that point in time, there was in all likelihood not a use case or requirement that would have directed us to create that content. If you've looked at our model, you can see that it's flexible, and it certainly allows for us to introduce different levels of granularity either in the international release or in a national extension if that's where appropriate. So we did have a goal with our model to create something that was extensible as new requirements evolved over the course of time. We wanted to be able to, kind of grow with our community.
Thanks, Toni. No, I don't see any other questions. Does anyone else have another question? And I'm not sure, I think others can see this list, but just in case, Ian Spires, who works on our education team e-learning group, has put a link up there to the user drug extension user support group, which is a new group that we're initiating to have members and people implementing SNOMED to come together to talk about their experience and to help each other with some of the challenges therein. So there's a link there for people who are interested in finding out more about that group. And there is another question. Are you planning to support administrable dose form in clinical drug?
So at this time, we do not have any plans to do that, but it is a topic that has come up in the past. So it's, one that is discussed on a not regular basis, but has been brought forward. So we do not have any firm plans, but we'll be working with members to understand how that needs to be addressed.
Okay, well, that seems to be it for question time. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. I hope you found it as informative and useful as we hoped you would. And thanks to Toni, and thank you for your questions and your interest. And we'll see you next time, hopefully. Thank you.